The morning sun peeked through the clouds as Karoline Leavitt walked down Main Street. She looked forward to her usual spot at Riverfront Cafe, where she had been meeting clients for nearly 2 years. The familiar jingle of the bell announced her arrival as she pushed open the heavy glass door. The cafe smelled different today, new coffee beans, perhaps. The walls had been repainted a soft blue, and the artwork had changed. Karoline noticed these small differences but thought nothing of them. Change was normal in small businesses. She settled at her corner table, the one with the perfect view of both the street and the riverside path. This spot had been her unofficial office for countless meetings. The waitress, Pam, gave her a quick wave as she hurried past with a tray of steaming mugs. "The usual, Karoline," Pam called over her shoulder. "Yes, please," Karoline replied, pulling out her laptop from her leather messenger bag. As her computer booted up, Karoline checked her phone. 3 new emails from clients and a text from her husband wishing her a good day. She smiled and sent back a quick heart emoji before opening her browser. The homepage of her favorite news site loaded, Conservative Daily Times, where she quickly scanned headlines before her meeting. A tall man with a crisp apron approached her table. Karoline hadn't seen him before, but the manager badge pinned to his chest explained his air of authority. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying more than necessary. Several nearby customers glanced up from their conversations. Karoline looked up with a friendly smile. "Yes." The man's eyes darted to her screen, glimmering on the website's bold logo. His expression hardened. "I'm Richard, the new manager. I couldn't help but notice what you're reading." Confused, Karoline glanced at her screen and back to the manager. "I'm just catching up on news before my client arrives." Richard crossed his arms. "We're trying to create a certain atmosphere here. That kind of content doesn't align with our cafe's values." The cafe grew quieter as more people turned to watch. Karoline felt heat rising to her cheeks, but kept her voice steady. "I'm sorry, but I don't understand. I'm just reading the news." "It's not just news, it's political," Richard said, pointing at her screen. "That website spreads harmful viewpoints." A couple at the next table whispered to each other. Pam stood frozen near the counter, Karoline's latte in hand, her eyes wide with disbelief. "I've been coming here for years," Karoline said, her hands trembling slightly as she closed her laptop. "My political views have never been an issue before." "Well, they are now," Richard stated flatly. "I'm going to have to ask you to finish your drink and leave. Actually, just leave. Your kind aren't welcome here anymore." The cafe fell completely silent. Karoline looked around at the familiar space where she'd spent countless productive hours. Some customers looked away in embarrassment. Others watched with uncomfortable curiosity. One older gentleman shook his head in disapproval, at Richard or at her. Karoline couldn't tell. With practiced grace from years in professional environments, Karoline packed her laptop away and stood up. Her knees felt weak, but her back remained straight. "I understand," she said, her voice clear despite the lump in her throat. "I'll take my business elsewhere." She walked toward the door, feeling dozens of eyes following her. Pam rushed forward, trying to hand her the latte to go, but Richard blocked the gesture with a stern look. Karoline gave Pam a small smile of thanks and continued to the exit. Outside, the cheerful morning seemed to mock her humiliation. She stood on the sidewalk, clutching her bag to her chest, trying to process what had just happened. Her phone buzzed. Her client was running 5 minutes late and looked forward to their meeting. Karoline leaned against the brick wall, took a deep breath of fresh air, and dialed her husband's number. As she waited for him to answer, she watched people enter and exit the cafe, going about their normal day, unaware that her world had just shifted. "Alexander," she said when he answered, her voice finally cracking. "Something happened. I need to talk to you." The wind carried away her words as she began to explain, standing alone on the sidewalk outside the place that had just rejected her for who she was. Karoline's hands shook as she held the phone to her ear. The busy street noises around her faded away as she waited for Alexander to answer. 3 rings, then 4. Each second stretched like an hour. "Hey, sweetheart," Alexander's warm voice finally came through. "How's your morning going?" Karoline moved away from the cafe entrance, finding a quiet spot beside a flowering planter box. "Not good," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I just got kicked out of Riverfront Cafe. What? The surprise in Alexander's voice was clear. What happened? A businessman hurried past, nearly bumping into her. Karoline stepped closer to the building wall, seeking privacy in the busy downtown area. The cafe has a new manager, she explained, watching as more customers entered the place that had just rejected her. He saw my news site open on my laptop and told me my kind wasn't welcome there anymore. Silence filled the line for a moment. When Alexander spoke again, his voice was tight with controlled anger. He said, "What? Are you serious?" "Dead serious," Karoline replied, catching her reflection in a store window. Her cheeks were flushed with embarrassment, but her eyes remained dry. She wouldn't cry over this. It was humiliating, Alex. Everyone was watching. "That's discrimination," Alexander said flatly. "It's completely unacceptable." A cool spring breeze ruffled Karoline's hair as she leaned against the brick wall. "I know. I've been going there for years. My client will be arriving any minute, and now I don't even have a place to meet him." She heard Alexander typing in the background. He was probably at his office already, surrounded by financial reports and investment proposals. Despite his busy schedule managing his growing business portfolio, he always made time for her calls. "Where are you now?" he asked. "Still outside the cafe. I need to find another place quickly and let my client know about the change." "Try Hamptons on Oak Street," Alexander suggested. "It's only 2 blocks from where you are." "I know the owner. Good guy who doesn't care about politics, just making great coffee and keeping customers happy." Karoline nodded, even though he couldn't see her. "Good idea. I'll head there now." "And Caro?" Alexander's voice softened. "Don't let this ruin your day. Some people just can't handle different viewpoints." "I know," she sighed, checking her watch. "But it still stings." "We'll talk more about this tonight," Alexander promised. "I'll make a reservation at Giovanni's for dinner, 7 o'clock. Despite everything, Karoline felt a small smile form. Giovanni's was their special occasion restaurant. "What are we celebrating?" "Your dignity," Alexander replied without hesitation. "The way you handled yourself in there, I know you, Caro. You walked out with your head high, didn't you?" "I tried to," she admitted, straightening her posture even now. "That's my girl. Always the professional." Pride warmed his tone. "I have some thoughts about this situation, but they can wait until dinner. For now, go nail that client meeting." Karoline took a deep breath, feeling her confidence returning. "Thanks, Alex. I needed that." "One more thing," Alexander added, his voice taking on that tone she recognized, the one he used when an idea was forming. "What's the name of this new manager?" "Richard, I think. Why?" "Just curious," Alexander replied, a little too casually. "See you at 7, love." After hanging up, Karoline adjusted her bag on her shoulder and headed toward Hampton's cafe with renewed purpose. As she walked, she couldn't help but wonder what Alexander was planning. In their 10 years together, she'd learned that particular tone of voice always preceded something significant. At Hampton's, she secured a quiet corner table and messaged her client about the location change. While waiting, she noticed other business people around her, typing on laptops, discussing projects, making deals, all focused on work rather than judging each other's political views. By the time her client arrived, Karoline had regained her professional composure. But throughout the meeting, in the back of her mind, she kept thinking about that calculating tone in Alexander's voice and what he might have in store for dinner that evening. Whatever he was planning, she knew one thing. Alexander never responded to situations like this with simple anger. He was too strategic for that. Tonight would be interesting, to say the least. The soft glow of candles flickered across white tablecloths as Karoline entered Giovanni's restaurant. The familiar scent of fresh bread and garlic welcomed her, momentarily pushing away thoughts of the morning's unpleasant encounter. Alexander was already waiting, standing up when he spotted her walking toward their corner table. "You look beautiful," he said, kissing her cheek before pulling out her chair. Karoline had changed after her last meeting, trading her business attire for a simple blue dress that Alexander had always loved. "Thank you for suggesting this," she said, settling into her seat as a waiter poured water into crystal glasses. "It's exactly what I needed after today." Alexander reached across the table, taking her hand in his. His thumb traced small circles on her skin, a calming gesture he'd done since their first date. "How did the rest of your meetings go?" "Surprisingly well," Karoline said. "Hamptons worked out fine. My client didn't even ask why we changed locations." The waiter returned with the bottle of Pinot Noir they'd ordered countless times before. As he poured 2 glasses, Karoline noticed how Alexander watched her with thoughtful eyes. He was processing something. She could always tell when his mind was working on a problem. Once they were alone again, Alexander raised his glass. "To staying true to yourself," he toasted. They clinked glasses, and Karoline took a small sip before asking, "Okay, what's on your mind? You've got that look." Alexander smiled, caught. "What look?" "The one you had before buying that tech company everyone said was doomed, the one that tripled our investment in 6 months." She leaned forward. "You're planning something." Their appetizers arrived, stuffed mushrooms arranged artfully on white porcelain. Alexander waited until the waiter had left again before speaking. "I've been thinking about what happened to you today," he said, his voice quiet but clear. "That cafe manager didn't just insult you. He showed a bigger problem happening everywhere." Karoline nodded, remembering the manager's dismissive glare. People judging each other without even talking first. "Exactly." Alexander tapped his fork against the plate gently. "We could file a complaint, write angry reviews, maybe even talk to a lawyer." "I don't want to sue anyone, Alex." "I know. And that's not what I'm suggesting." He set down his fork and leaned in. "What if we respond differently? Not with anger, but with class." Karoline raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." "Someone like that manager, he thinks people with your views are all a certain way. Closed-minded. Unsophisticated." Alexander's eyes sparkled with determination. "What if we show him how wrong he is without saying a word?" The main courses arrived, her favorite salmon with dill sauce and his steak, perfectly medium rare. They paused as the waiter ground fresh pepper over their plates and refilled their water glasses. "So what exactly are you thinking?" Karoline asked when they were alone again, cutting into her salmon. Alexander took a bite of his steak before answering. "Tomorrow, I have that meeting with the investment group about the new downtown development project. The one that's been in the works for months." Karoline had heard him mention it several times, a multi-million-dollar project that would revitalize an aging section of downtown. "Yes, we were planning to meet at the Grand Hotel," but his smile grew slightly mischievous. "What if we moved it to that restaurant next to Riverfront Cafe? The one with the big windows?" Karoline put down her fork, starting to understand. "And arrive in style. The Rolls has been sitting in the garage for weeks. Might as well put it to good use." Alexander shrugged with practiced casualness, but his eyes gave away his excitement at the plan forming between them. "Not to cause trouble," Karoline said thoughtfully, "just to make a point." "A point about success, respect, and dignity," Alexander agreed. "We don't need to say a word about politics. Our presence will speak for itself." As they finished their meal, they refined the details of tomorrow's plan. Not once did they mention revenge or getting even. This wasn't about hurting the cafe manager, it was about standing tall in the face of prejudice. Over dessert, a shared tiramisu that had been their favorite since their first anniversary, Karoline felt her spirits truly lift for the first time since that morning. "You know what I love most about you?" she asked, setting down her spoon. "My brilliant investment strategies," Alexander teased. "Your heart," Karoline corrected, reaching for his hand. "You don't fight fire with fire. You rise above it." Alexander squeezed her fingers gently. "Tomorrow will be interesting," he promised. "But more importantly, it'll be dignified." Morning sunlight streamed through the bedroom curtains as Alexander's alarm chimed softly. He reached over to silence it, careful not to wake Karoline, who was still peacefully asleep beside him. For a moment, he watched her breathe slowly, her face relaxed and unburdened by yesterday's humiliation. Alexander slipped out of bed quietly and headed to the shower. Today needed to run like clockwork if their plan was going to work. As warm water washed over him, he mentally ran through his checklist for the morning. Downstairs in their kitchen, dressed in a charcoal suit and blue tie, Alexander made coffee. The rich aroma filled the room just as Karoline appeared in the doorway, wrapped in her robe, hair tousled from sleep. "You're up early," she said, accepting the mug he offered. Big day. Alexander checked his watch. I've already called Tom about the car. He'll have it ready by 11. Karoline leaned against the counter, blowing ripples across her coffee. Are you sure about this? It's not too much. Alexander smiled. The Rolls has been gathering dust since the company went public. Besides, it's not about showing off. It's about making a statement about who we are. And who are we? Karoline asked, a smile playing at her lips. People who respond to small-mindedness with grace, he answered, kissing her forehead before heading to his home office. While Karoline prepared for her own meetings, Alexander made 3 important phone calls. First to Roberto's, the upscale Italian restaurant next door to Riverfront Cafe, securing their private room with the large street-facing windows. Next to his assistant, changing the location of the investment meeting. Finally to Tom, his rarely used chauffeur, confirming the time to bring the Rolls-Royce. At 10:30, Karoline stepped into Alexander's office wearing a tailored navy dress that radiated quiet confidence. How do I look? She asked. Perfect, he replied, closing his laptop. I've just heard back from everyone. They're all confirmed for the new location. Karoline adjusted his tie slightly. Who exactly is coming? The full investment group, Alexander said, his eyes twinkling with excitement. George from Heritage Capital, Patricia who runs that tech incubator downtown, the Henderson brothers who want to fund the retail spaces. That's quite a lineup, Karoline remarked. And they've all been asking to meet you for months, Alexander added. Your communications expertise would be valuable for the project. Karoline hadn't expected this. You want me at the meeting? If you're free, your input would genuinely help. Alexander checked his watch again. Tom will be here in 15 minutes. As they gathered their materials, Karoline's phone buzzed with an email notification. My 11 o'clock cancelled, she said, looking up from the screen. I'm all yours until my 2 o'clock pitch meeting. Alexander grinned. Perfect timing. At precisely 11, the intercom announced Tom's arrival. From their front window, they could see the gleaming Rolls-Royce Phantom waiting in the driveway, an impressive machine in midnight blue that Alexander had purchased after his company went public 3 years ago. He rarely used it, preferring his more practical everyday car, but today called for something special. Ready? Alexander asked, offering his arm. Karoline took a deep breath and nodded. Ready. Outside, Tom stood by the rear door, opening it with a white-gloved hand as they approached. The buttery leather seats welcomed them as they settled into the spacious back of the luxury vehicle. Roberto's restaurant, please, Tom, Alexander instructed. Take the route down Main Street. Yes, sir, Tom replied, closing their door before taking his place behind the wheel. As the Rolls-Royce pulled away from their driveway, Karoline reached for Alexander's hand. This feels a bit like prom night, she joked, glancing around at the handcrafted interior. Alexander laughed. Better suits, at least. The car moved smoothly through the suburbs toward downtown. From inside, they could see people turning to look as the distinctive vehicle passed by. Not many Rolls-Royces were seen in their mid-sized city. The meeting starts at 12, Alexander explained, reviewing details on his tablet. We'll arrive at 11:45. Everyone else will come separately. And Richard, the cafe manager? Karoline asked. Will he even notice? Alexander smiled knowingly. Riverfront Cafe has floor-to-ceiling windows facing the street. Roberto's has its private dining room with the same view just next door. Trust me, he'll notice. As they approached downtown, Karoline felt a flutter of nervous excitement. Yesterday, she had walked away from Riverfront Cafe feeling small and judged. Today, she would walk past it with her head held high, not to seek revenge, but to show that narrow-mindedness couldn't diminish her worth. The Rolls-Royce turned onto Main Street, its polished surface reflecting the springtime sun, moving steadily toward their destination. Main Street bustled with lunchtime activity as the Rolls-Royce Phantom glided to a stop directly in front of Roberto's restaurant. The sleek vehicle drew immediate attention from pedestrians, who slowed their pace to admire the luxury car. Through the tinted windows, Karoline could see Riverfront Cafe next door, its tables filled with the lunch crowd. Perfect timing, Alexander murmured, checking his watch. The cafe's busiest hour. Tom stepped out first, his uniform crisp and professional, as he walked around to open their door. Karoline took a deep breath, smoothing her dress before Tom's white-gloved hand appeared, offering assistance. She stepped out gracefully, the sunlight catching the supple silver threading in her navy dress. The sidewalk felt different beneath her feet today. Yesterday, it had been the place where she stood humiliated, clutching her phone. Today, it was a stage where she walked with purpose. Alexander emerged after her, buttoning his suit jacket as he stood to his full height. "Thank you, Tom," he said. "We'll be about 2 hours." Tom nodded respectfully. "I'll be ready when you need me, sir." As the chauffeur returned to the car, Alexander offered Karoline his arm. Together, they walked unhurriedly past Riverfront Cafe's large front windows. Inside, Karoline caught glimpses of customers pausing mid-bite, conversations stopping as heads turned toward the striking couple passing by. And there, behind the counter, stood Richard, the manager who had kicked her out yesterday, his coffee pot frozen mid-pour as recognition dawned on his face. Karoline didn't slow her pace or turn her head, but from the corner of her eye, she saw his shocked expression. "He recognized me," she whispered to Alexander, her lips barely moving. "Good." Alexander replied quietly, guiding her to Roberto's entrance. The maitre d' greeted them warmly at Roberto's door. "Mr. and Mrs. Leavitt, welcome. Your private room is ready, and 2 of your guests have already arrived." The rich aroma of Italian cuisine enveloped them as they followed him through the main dining area. Roberto's was known for its old-world charm, dark wood paneling, crisp white tablecloths, and soft lighting from ornate chandeliers. Several diners looked up as they passed, a few nodding in recognition of Alexander, whose business ventures had been featured in the local business journal. Their private dining room faced the street, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a clear view of Riverfront Cafe across the way. Inside, George from Heritage Capital and Patricia from the Downtown Tech Incubator stood to greet them. "Alexander, wonderful to see you," George said, extending his hand. "And this must be Karoline. I've heard great things about your communications work." Patricia moved forward with a warm smile. "Finally we meet. Your campaign for the Children's Hospital was brilliant." As they exchanged pleasantries, 2 more people entered, the Henderson brothers, whose family had been in real estate development for 3 generations. The older brother carried architectural drawings rolled under his arm. "Hope you don't mind," he said, unrolling the plans on the table. "We've been tweaking the designs based on your feedback." Within minutes, the room buzzed with energy as the investment group discussed the downtown development project, a mixed-use complex that would transform an abandoned factory district into shops, apartments, and office spaces. Karoline found herself drawn into conversations about community outreach and public relations strategy for the project. Outside the window, life on Main Street continued. Pedestrians passed by, some stopping to admire the Rolls-Royce still parked prominently in front. Occasionally, servers from Riverfront Cafe would glance through the window, their curiosity evident. The waiter arrived with appetizers arranged artfully on gleaming platters, prosciutto with fresh tomatoes, calamari with lemon aioli, and antipasto with imported meats and cheeses. As glasses were filled with sparkling water and wine, the conversation shifted to financing details. Karoline contributed thoughtfully to the discussion, but communications expertise proving valuable as they debated how to present the project to the public. Alexander watched her with quiet pride, knowing her insights were genuinely helping shape the project's future. Through the window, Karoline noticed Richard from the cafe standing outside, pretending to check something on the sidewalk while stealing glances at the gathering in Roberto's. His expression had shifted from the smug superiority of yesterday to something closer to uncertainty. A tray of entrees arrived, the rich aromas filling the private dining room. As Alexander leaned in to share a quiet observation with Karoline, she realized something important. She wasn't thinking about yesterday's humiliation anymore. She was fully engaged in this meaningful project, surrounded by people who valued her contributions regardless of her political views. That, she understood, was the true victory, not making Richard uncomfortable, but moving forward with purpose and dignity. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through Roberto's windows as lunch progressed into its second hour. Papers and tablets covered the table, surrounded by half-empty wine glasses and the remains of their impressive meal. The investment group had moved from polite discussion to energetic planning, with occasional bursts of laughter breaking the serious tone. Patricia tapped her pen against her notepad. So we're agreed on the community garden on the rooftop. It'll add to the construction costs, but the goodwill should more than make up for it. Absolutely, the younger Henderson brother said. People want buildings with character and purpose now, not just another shopping center. Alexander nodded his agreement, then turned to Karoline. What do you think about hosting a town hall before we submit the final plans? Get the community invested early? Karoline, who had been taking notes on her tablet, looked up. That's exactly what I was thinking. If people feel heard from the beginning, they're more likely to support the project long-term. George raised his water glass. And that's why we needed a communications expert at this table. Brilliant idea. The conversation had flowed easily over the past hour, with Karoline's suggestions receiving genuine appreciation from everyone present. It was a stark contrast to yesterday's dismissal at the cafe next door, where she hadn't even been given a chance to speak. Through the window, Karoline noticed a steady stream of customers entering Riverfront Cafe for late lunch. Several did double takes at the Rolls-Royce, still parked prominently outside. Inside Roberto's, waiters moved efficiently around their table, refreshing drinks and clearing empty plates. Before we wrap up, Alexander said, pulling out a folder from his briefcase, I'd like to discuss the job creation numbers. This project isn't just about buildings, it's about changing lives. The older Henderson brother leaned forward. Our initial estimates show about 300 construction jobs for the first phase alone. And once it's complete, Patricia added, the retail spaces and offices should create close to 500 permanent positions. Not to mention, George interjected, the ripple effect on surrounding businesses. More workers means more lunch orders, more dry cleaning, more of everything. As they discussed the economic impact, a commotion outside caught Karoline's attention. Richard, the cafe manager, was speaking animatedly to someone just outside the cafe door, likely another employee. His gestures were broad and frustrated, his face flushed as he occasionally glanced toward Roberto's windows. Looks like someone's having a rough day, the younger Henderson brother remarked, following Karoline's gaze. Alexander simply raised an eyebrow but said nothing. The meeting continued with discussions about timeline and next steps. As they were wrapping up, the maitre d' approached their table with a bottle of champagne and 7 glasses. Compliments of Roberto himself, he explained, expertly popping the cork with minimal sound. He heard about your development project and wanted to congratulate you all. The golden liquid bubbled into crystal flutes as Roberto himself appeared. A short, energetic man with salt and pepper hair and a warm smile. This project will be wonderful for our downtown, he said, taking the last glass. A toast to progress and prosperity. They'd all stood, raising their glasses. The moment was perfectly framed in the large windows, 7 successful professionals in an upscale restaurant, celebrating a project that would transform the city. Outside, pedestrians slowed to watch, and even customers in Riverfront Cafe turned in their seats to see what was happening. To new beginnings, Alexander added, his eyes meeting Karoline's briefly. After they sipped their champagne, papers were gathered and handshakes exchanged. The Henderson brothers left first, followed by Patricia, who had another meeting across town. George lingered, discussing specific financing details with Alexander. Karoline stepped away to freshen up, and when she returned, she noticed George speaking with Roberto near the entrance. Alexander was standing by the window, gazing thoughtfully at Riverfront Cafe. Penny, for your thoughts, she asked, joining him. I was just thinking about how things work out, he replied. If you hadn't been kicked out yesterday, you wouldn't have been here today to help shape this project. Karoline nodded slowly. Sometimes rejection puts you exactly where you need to be. Alexander checked his watch. Tom should be bringing the car around now. Ready to make our exit. She smiled, smoothing her dress. Just as ready as I was for our entrance. As they prepared to leave, Karoline noticed Richard watching from inside the cafe, his expression unreadable, but his attention undeniable. Whatever he was thinking, it didn't matter anymore. Today wasn't about him, it was about moving forward towards something better. 2 weeks passed quickly. The maple trees along Main Street had unfurled more leaves, painting the sidewalks with dappled shadows in the late spring sunshine. Karoline sat at her home office desk, reviewing press release drafts for the downtown development project when her phone buzzed with a text from Alexander. "Check your email. Something interesting just came in." She opened her inbox to find a message from an unfamiliar address, on.clark@riverfrontcave.com. Her heartbeat quickened as she clicked it open. "Dear Mrs. Leavitt," it began. "My name is Richard Clark, manager of Riverfront Cafe. I'm writing to offer my sincere apology for the way you were treated in our establishment 2 weeks ago." Karoline leaned back in her chair, reading the lengthy email twice. Richard explained how he'd recognized her during the meeting at Roberto's and had later learned about the development project that would bring hundreds of jobs to the community. He admitted that his behavior had been unprofessional and based on unfair assumptions. "Regardless of political differences, everyone deserves respect and service in a public establishment. My actions did not reflect the values our cafe claims to uphold." Outside her window, birds chirped in the garden as Karoline contemplated her response. Part of her wanted to ignore the email entirely. After all, she'd moved on. Yet something about the sincerity of the message made her pause. Her phone rang. It was Alexander. "Did you read it?" he asked when she answered. "Just finished," she replied. "What do you think?" "I think it's your call," Alexander said. "But he seems genuinely sorry." Karoline switched to speakerphone and began typing a response. "I'm not going to be petty about this. If he's sincere, the right thing is to acknowledge it." Her reply was brief but gracious, thanking Richard for his apology and expressing hope that people with different views could find common ground through respectful conversation. She hit send before she could second-guess herself. That evening, as she and Alexander shared dinner on their patio, her phone chimed with another email. Richard had responded, thanking her for her graciousness and inviting both her and Alexander for complimentary coffee anytime. He also mentioned that the cafe was instituting a new policy welcoming all customers regardless of political views. "Well, that's unexpected," Alexander remarked after she read it aloud. "Are you going to take him up on the coffee offer?" Karoline twirled pasta around her fork thoughtfully. "Maybe, not right away, but eventually, it would be a good example to set." The next morning brought surprising news. A local business blog had published a story about the downtown development project, highlighting the job creation aspects and community benefits. Near the end, the article mentioned how the project had been finalized during a meeting at Roberto's restaurant. By afternoon, the story had been picked up by several local news outlets. One reporter had interviewed nearby business owners about the economic impact, including Richard from Riverfront Cafe. "We're excited about the development," Richard was quoted saying. "It's a reminder that when we look past our differences, we can create something valuable for everyone in the community." Karoline showed the article to Alexander when he returned from work. "Looks like someone learned something," she said. Alexander smiled. "And not just him. I've had 3 calls today from people wanting to know how they can invest in the project." Over the following weeks, the development moved from planning to implementation. Karoline found herself increasingly involved, eventually accepting a formal role handling public relations for the project. Her office? A corner space in the new building with a view of both Roberto's and Riverfront Cafe. One afternoon, 6 months after the incident, Karoline walked into Riverfront Cafe for a meeting with a community group interested in the project. Richard greeted her professionally at the door. "Your usual table is ready, Mrs. Leavitt," he said, gesturing to the corner spot that had once been her regular place. As she settled in, opening her laptop without worry about what was on the screen, Karoline realized how much had changed. What had begun as an uncomfortable confrontation had transformed into something unexpected, a catalyst for growth, both personal and community-wide. Outside, construction had begun on the abandoned factory site. The sounds of progress drifted through the open cafe windows, hammers, saws, and workers calling to each other. New jobs, new opportunities, new beginnings. And it had all started that day when she'd walked out of this cafe with her head held high, and her husband's Rolls-Royce had arrived the next day to make a silent but powerful statement about dignity and respect.